Well, you might say that my next guest is the original internet disruptor. He is Steve Case, the co-founder and former chairman and CEO of AOL. He was instrumental in the company's merger with Time Warner back so long ago in 2000. And Steve, great to have you joining us on the set. And as we're talking about disruptive by design, when people look back at the AOL Time Warner merger, that was supposed to be the ultimate disruptor,
right,
to the media world. And looking back on that transaction and going forward to your own investments in the internet space or the technology space, what have you learned from that?
Well, the early days of AOL, the first 15 years before we did the merger, it really was about trying to create a new medium. How do you get people connected to the internet? How do you explain to people what the internet was? AOL, when we went public in 1992, was the first internet company to go public. So a lot of it was evangelism. Keeping that entrepreneurial drive going is hard as you get bigger, and even harder when you have large mergers. So a lot of my advice to the companies we're backing is to focus on your people, focus on passion, focus on perseverance, what I call the 3 Ps. And we've tried to apply those lessons to the businesses we've invested in through Revolution.
Right, and I know through Revolution you've invested in several companies, including Zipcar, which is one that I want to talk to you about in a little bit. But the AOL that stands right now, which is more of a content company. Now, I know you're not, involved day to day with AOL anymore. But what do you make of it now as to how it's transformed?
Well, I think they're back to being entrepreneurial. The hope was that together all these companies could drive synergy and convergence. And remember, 10 years ago when we announced the merger, YouTube didn't exist and iTunes didn't exist, and a lot of things that we're now taken for granted were things that this company could have done. But for a variety of reasons, which is really kind of ancient history, it didn't happen. At least now AOL's freed up to be more entrepreneurial and more focused. I think with Tim Armstrong, he is building a management team and a more focused entrepreneurial strategy.
And focused on content, advertiser-based content now, which is completely different than the AOL that you had started, though.
Well, yeah, we were always focused more on community. How do you get people connected? But there was always some content to it. There always was some advertising to it. So I think a more focused strategy makes sense for them.
It suddenly got quieter.
I think everybody going on to the conference.
What'd you do, Steve? All right. So in any case, moving forward, though, taking a look at the other web tycoons that have come up, including Mark Zuckerberg over at Facebook. I mean, you, in many ways, one of the original, I suppose you could say, web tycoons. What kind of advice would you give them now?
You got to focus on the consumer and focus on the product, and not be so obsessed with the business model that you lose sight of the sort of that core experience and how people engage with your product or service. That's certainly true of the internet. We actually back one company called Living Social that's doing group couponing now, which is one of the hottest categories. It was 10 million last year, it'll be over 100 million this year, and that's the same advice to them. How do you leverage the internet as a platform to try to drive forward your business into interesting, more scaled kind of ways? But it's got to start and end with a product.
Right, but taking Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, at Facebook, it's grown from this great startup to now a company that services 500 million users or something along those lines, running into these privacy issues. At what point do you go from a startup to being a real company? And at that point, when does the original founder have to step aside?
Well, I'm not sure that. When I got started with AOL, people said when it's like 50 million or 100 million, at that point, sometimes the founding CEO, the entrepreneur, needs to step aside. I didn't find that to be the case. I think it really depends on the person and what drives them. When we took AOL from when it went public, it was 30 million in revenue, built it up with before we did the merger to billions of dollars of revenue, and so I think it's possible to do that. And I think Mark has done a great job in building the core product and building a team around them. I don't know exactly what the revenues are, but probably in the $1 billion range. So that's pretty significant.
They never like to get into numbers there.
And I think that's smart because as long as they can stay private and focus on building the core business and expanding the audience and improving the products and services, that should be where their focus is.
What do you make of the privacy issues that have come up though around Facebook and other social networks?
Privacy is a big deal, and people need to focus on it. I think they're getting an education that the good news is Facebook is now part of everyday life. The bad news is people hold them to a higher responsibility, both individual consumers and even governments. I think they're adjusting to that.
Right, and I know that you're a user of some of these websites, including Twitter. I've read your Twitter.
Sure, I've always enjoyed
345,000 followers or something along those lines.
It's been a lot of fun.
Okay, Steve. So Revolution, just quickly, tell me. You've invested in several companies. Zipcar is one. What attracts your money these days?
Well, it's really building on some of the lessons I learned from AOL. How do you attack industries with a disruptive approach that really impacts the way consumers, because that's our focus, consumer businesses, conduct their everyday lives.
But how does a car sharing network?
Well, we invested in Zipcar because we think car sharing is a transformative way way to get around in cities. We invested in exclusive resorts because we think in the real estate hospitality area, a club model is better as opposed to owning a second home. We invested in Living Social because we think group couponing is a fabulous new form of advertising and e-commerce. We invested in Everyday Health on the healthcare side because we think consumers have to get more engaged in thinking about managing their health. And finally, we invested in financial services company Revolution Money, which we recently sold to American Express because we thought there was an opportunity for a new way for people to pay for things digitally as opposed to using physical currency. So all of these things really have the same idea. They're empowering consumers, giving them more choice and control and convenience in different sectors.
Yeah, it is more about control these days on the internet. Steve, thanks so much for joining us.